all right? My name's Scotty. I'm one of the leaders here at Way Forward here at New Condition Church. And Way Forward is a recovery and healing ministry for anybody who's experienced trauma, hurt, gone through addiction, any type of disappointment in life that it just has you stuck. We believe that the only way to get through that is through the love of Jesus. And we are here. We're not trained professionals, but we are people who have experienced that love of Jesus. And we want to help you get from that place in life where you're stuck to a place where you're living and thriving in life. So if you're hesitant about coming for whatever reason, you don't know anybody, you don't really trust anybody here, we understand that. I just like to encourage you to come, hang out with us. You don't even have to share. Just introduce yourself and that be it. And just experience the love that we've experienced. We meet here every Monday night at 6:30 p.m. It's 1 hour. We would love to have you come out and join us for a time of caring and sharing and just getting through life together. Hope to see you soon.
All right. Good morning. How is everybody? Third service? Yeah. This is third service. It's my third coffee. It's going to be a good service. Hey. Anyways, I hope everybody's having a good summer. My family and I were able to get away, and we went to Rockaway Beach. And so I asked my daughter, who's 13, I was like, okay, what do you want to do on vacation? She's like, I want to do this TikTok trend where you dig a hole, like a heart-shaped hole, and then you put your phone in it and you take a picture. So this is my family on vacation. So my two kids, and then it's kind of our third child. My husband would say it's our third child, is Phoebe. That's our dog. So that's my family. So we've been in the Gospel of John for the past couple of weeks, kind of taking chunks of scripture. And today I'm going to pivot a bit and it'll be a little bit different because this is not my comfort zone standing up here in front of everybody. And so I'm just going to pretend like we're at coffee and you're like, oh, what's God been doing in your life? Oh, here, let me share my journey with you. So I'm just going to take you on the journey that God's had me on for the last probably year and a half, maybe 2 years. And it's just a journey of slowing down and really being present with God and being present with the people in my life. And so I hope to take you along on this, and I hope you'll be challenged and encouraged. And if not, Pastor Matt will be back next week. So, come back next week. So I'm going to pray, and then we'll get going. Jesus, I'm just so grateful for your presence here this morning. Lord, I'm grateful that you care about each one of us and that you have something for each one of us to hear this morning. And so we just pray for open ears and open hearts to hear what you want to say to us. Amen. So I remember probably about a year and a half or 2 years ago, I was in a spot where things were just super busy. That's just kind of life, right? So I work full-time here at the church. I'm the operations manager, so a full-time job, and then family and kids who are involved in all the things. And then there was stuff going on with the extended family. And so it was just kind of a going. And so there was one Sunday I was sitting here, and I remember it was just like a song about the presence of Jesus, and I just start bawling. And I'm like, what is wrong with me? There's nothing dramatic happening in my life, but I just came to the point, and Jesus was just like, you're on this hamster wheel of going, and you're not getting off and being present with me. And so it's just a challenge for me to slow down. So I titled my message today, Slow Your Roll. So I'm not super hip or slang or use slang a lot, but I have teenagers who do. So I kind of just try to lean into it and just use slang as much as I can when I talk to them. So you're looking so drippy today, or it's bussin', or no cap, bro. And bro, bra, my son all the time, bro. I'm like, I'm not your bro, and I'm definitely not your bra. I'm your mom. Okay, I draw my limits here. But so I was like, okay, I'm gonna lean into this whole, so this is for my child, slow your roll. Today. So I think there's a cultural moment that we're in, and if you just kind of look around, you see people are just stressed out, have a lot going on, overwhelmed, overworked. There's just pressure from all around us and also from inside of us. And there's these endless opportunities of things that we could be doing. And I think in America, we're always looking for the bigger and for the better. And I need a better car, and I need a bigger house. And there's all these things that we're striving for. And then we're bombarded with all these images and advertisements of what other people are doing. We get on social media, or, and then we see all these things and we have these expectations. And I think even like there's this speed, and we're like, we're gonna get behind if we don't do it. And I think especially like kids sports, if any of your kids are in sports, like if they're not 3 and you're starting them in AAU and club ball and like all these things, like they're never gonna play ever, in junior high. Like there's just this pressure of like jumping on this wheel of craziness, and we all do it, right? Because we have to when you want kids in sports. But and then so we have this craziness in our society, this constant speed and pressures, and then at the same time we have our phones, or we have access to the internet all the time. So we have access to distractions like all the time. We can be on email, and we can be on social media, and we have text messages and notifications, and constantly something that we could be doing. We have news that's going on in the world, so we're constantly inundated with these things. And so what happens when we have this rush and this hurry and also this distraction? What happens to our souls? And I just feel like our souls weren't meant to carry that kind of a pace. And you can see it, like it plays out in physically. If you look at our society, heart disease is on the rise, and respiratory issues, there's lack of sleep. Like people just are struggling physically, and then also mentally. Anxiety, depression, suicide, like it's on the rise. And then also spiritually. And I read a quote from Dallas Willard, who's an American philosopher, and he said, "An overbusy, digitally distracted life of speed is the greatest threat to spiritual life that we face in the modern world." And I think we don't always recognize it. Like it's a threat to our spirituality, because we get hurried and we get distracted with all the things that are going on. And then God kind of becomes marginalized in our life. And our relationship with God deteriorates a bit. We stop coming to church. We stop being in community with other people. And we're not living the way God intended us to live. Because what does he say? If we look at in the Bible, in Matthew, it talks about a Pharisee came to Jesus and he said, "What's the greatest commandments?" And Jesus said in Matthew 22, he said, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself." So really, there's 2 things. Love God and love people is what Jesus is asking us to do. And I would dare to say that if we're hurried and distracted, we're doing neither well. Like we're not loving God well, and we're not loving people well. So hurry and love, they're just not really compatible if you look at that. Because what is love according to the Bible? In Corinthians 13, it says, "Love is patient and kind." And I could stop right there. When I'm hurried, not patient, not always kind. And then it keeps going. It says, "Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance." And I think if we just look at that, that's not necessarily what we see in our culture. Like that's not who we are when we're getting caught up in all the things that our culture says that we should be doing. Like we're skimming the surface, and then we're trying to add God into this. And there's a quote from John Ortman in the book Soul Keeping. It's kind of a long quote, so bear with me, but I felt like it was worth reading. It says, "Being busy is a condition of our outer world, having many things to do. Being hurried is a problem of the soul. It is being so preoccupied with myself and what myself has to do that I am no longer able to be fully present with God, with myself, and with other people. I'm unable to occupy the present moment." Listen, busyness migrates to hurry when we let it squeeze God out of our lives. I cannot live in the kingdom of God with a hurried soul, and I cannot rest in God with a hurried soul. And what I like, it's like being busy isn't necessarily the issue. Like Jesus was busy, but he wasn't hurried. Like, so we can have all these things going on, but still not be hurried. And Jesus just created some habits and practices, so we'll be talking about those a little bit today. Because it migrates to hurry when we take God out of the equation, right? And so when we're like hurried and distracted, not only are we not loving well, but we're also not living with peace and joy. We lose our peace and our joy in our life when we're rushing around trying to do all these things. And so peace and joy, it's not just like emotions. Sometimes we're like, oh, love, joy, peace, those are emotions, but really they're conditions of the heart and they're way that we can express ourselves in the world. Because when I'm rushed and when I'm distracted, that oozes out on other people. It just doesn't affect just me, it affects others as well. For example, leaving the house with children, I don't know why this is like the difficult one. So like we need to go. They need shoes, they need knee pads, you know, like helmet, cleats, water bottle. Every time we go to a sporting event, this is what you need. For some reason, my daughter's sitting right here. For some reason, that's difficult. And so then we're like, okay, we got to go. Well, I can't find my shoes, and my water bottle's not filled up. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? You knew that we were supposed to be leaving. Come on, get it around. And then they start rushing around the house and freaking out. So everybody's freaking out, and we're going to be late. I hate being late. But we're going to be late, and so I'm freaking out. They're freaking out. We're sitting in the car. Nobody's happy, and we're still late. Now I could have changed the scenario and been like, okay, I know we're going to be late. We're going to work on these issues. Like, let's get our shoes together the night before. Or, you know, let's fill up our water bottle and put it in the fridge. Like, there's obviously ways that we can not be like that. But even in that moment, even if we're rushing around, like even if we're late, I can still be at peace and be like, okay, we're going to be late. Let's get our shoes and let's walk out the door. You know, so but it oozes out when we're hurried and rushed. And a good example of that is somebody who just stayed at peace is, so a couple of weeks ago, we had our mega sports camp. And it was fun. But so I came in, it was Tuesday through Friday, and I'm like, it's all a blur. But so I came in early on Monday morning to help Bree, our children's pastor, load up. And so it was her and I, and so I walk in and I'm like, how you doing? And she's like, well, I have 2 sick kids out of her 4. 2 of her kids were sick. I'm like, okay. And then her husband, who runs an IT business, his one employee was sick, and he was supposed to be like our mascot all week long. I'm like, oh, okay, it's not great. And then she's like, okay, and then I had 3 volunteers call out, so we have nobody to run the soccer station. I'm like, okay, it's Monday. We have 120 kids showing up tomorrow, and we have nobody to run this. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? In my mind. And she's like, it'll be fine. It's not fine. Are you kidding me? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, anyways, it was fine. We sat down with a list. We rearranged people. We have rock star volunteers who are like, okay, I'll shift to soccer. Like, it was fine. And she was just at peace and like, no, we'll figure it out. But yeah, go Bree. But that's how it shows, like when we're at rest and at peace in the midst of like a crazy situation that could have been like freaking out, she brought peace into that situation. So kind of back to my example of, so I found myself in a spot just with a hurried and a distracted soul. And I was just like, okay, I need to get stuff done. Like, that's just how I am. I like to check things off my list. And I just caught myself being like irritable with my kids. And I would just be like worried about all the things that could happen or that are going on. And then I would come home, and even if we have nothing going on, I'd be like, yeah, I'm done. I'm checking out. Like I can't deal with all you people right now. Like, I'm just gonna go lay on my hammock and read my book because I'm done. You know, and that's like, and I think sometimes we do that, and it's not wrong to take a moment for ourselves. Like, that's not the issue, but like when I'm doing it because I'm escaping something and I have too much going on and I have to just like shut down, then I know I'm not in a very healthy spot. And I had a very kind husband who very kindly pointed out, he's like, you might want to like evaluate what's going on here. So yeah, I'm trying to be a little bit better about coming home and just being engaged. But you know, sometimes that lasts for like a week. We're like, okay, I have good intentions for a week. But sometimes like stuff happens in life that forces us to slow down. So at the end of last year, I was playing volleyball with my daughter, and I took a step, and it felt like something hit me in the back of the leg, and I went down, and I tore my Achilles. So that makes you slow down. It makes you rest, because I'm sitting in the orthopedics office, and I'm like, okay, so we decided on surgery. So I'm like, okay, well, surgery, so in a couple weeks I'll be good. And he smiles at me like, oh, you're sweet. He's like, no, this is 6 weeks 6-week cast, 6 weeks boot, and then PT, and it's about a 9 to 12 month recovery. 9 to 12, I have stuff to do, people. I can't sit around for 3 months in a cast and a boot. This is ridiculous. But it forced me to slow down, and I couldn't do anything. Like, it was my right foot, can't drive. I shouldn't drive. Anyways, that's another story. Okay, sorry. I hope. Okay. So I shouldn't be doing anything. So I'm laying, and Christian's like having to get me coffee, and like I can't make dinner, and I can't. And so I'm just sitting there. I'm like, this is really, really hard to slow down. So I'm trying to take inventory of my heart. I'm like, why is this so hard for me? And one of the things which I already knew about myself is I have serious FOMO. Like, I do not want to miss out on fun. Like, when we first got married, I'd be like, okay, and then there's this that we can do, and then there's this going on at the church, and then we have to be at this. And he's like, oh my gosh. I'm like, but they're having fun without me. So now the joke is at our house, Jill, they're having fun without you. And I'm like, oh no. Anyways, I've gotten better in that regards, but I have a tendency to want to do all the things. Like, we go on vacation, and I look at TripAdvisor, okay, what are the top 30 things? We need to do them all, because we're only here one time. We're doing all the things. And then Christian's like, okay, let's pick a few and only do those few. I'm like, oh, okay, fine. But I like to do all the things. And then something else that I discovered is that sometimes I value more what other people think than what God wants. And I think sometimes in our culture, like, it's good. Like, we want to be striving and hurrying, and we want to be seen as busy and accomplishing and achieving things. And that in and of itself is not bad, but when I'm doing it because I'm trying to please other people, then it becomes an issue. If I'm doing it because that's what God's called me to do, that's one thing. But when it shifts and I'm doing it because I'm like, oh, well, I want to be seen as productive, or I want to be seen as achieving, or I want to be seen as blank, then I'm doing it for somebody else and not because I'm supposed to be doing it, and it's because what God's called me to do. And then the last thing that I really realized with having to sit around and do nothing and not being able to do a whole lot with my Achilles is I like doing, and I feel like that's how I bring value to people, and that's how I feel like I bring value to situations. And I couldn't do anything. Like, I had to let other people, like, I had to bum rides off of people. I had to let people, like, go get me things. And that was just really, really hard for me. My son's like, you're living the life. I'm like, no, no, this is really hard for me to not do. And it was just a moment where I realized, like, that's where I put my value, is I feel like my value is in what I can bring, what I can do, and not just simply in who I am. And God just really challenged me. He's like, your value is not in what you're doing. Your value is just simply in being who I've created you to be, and to love me and to love people. And so that was just one of the things that I learned as I was laying on the couch for weeks. So what are some things, so I was even then evaluating, I'm like, okay, so what are some things, how can we change these patterns? Like, we do live in this culture, but how can we, in this culture, still live differently? Because God has a different vision for us. He doesn't want us to be caught up in this crazy, hurried, distracted world and not be engaging with him and others. And John Mark Comer, in the book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, which is a really good book, I highly recommend it. Some of the stuff that I'm talking about today is from there. And he says, if you want to experience the life of Jesus, you have to adopt the lifestyle of Jesus. So if we look at what Jesus did, and in Matthew 11:28, he invites us to live like he did. He says, are you tired and worn out? It's the Message translation. Burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me and watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace, and I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. And so if we're looking at how Jesus lived, his life was full. Like, you don't have to get very far into the Gospels to realize, like, Jesus was going from town to town, and he was healing people, and people constantly wanted something from him. They constantly came to him. But even within that busyness, even within all the craziness that was happening around him, he was able to live a life that had margin, where he was able to stop and be present with the people. Even though he was going somewhere, he was able to stop and be present with the people that were right there in front of him. And he lived on mission. He was doing what God had asked him to do. And so how did Jesus live like that? And I think if we look at his life, we see that he's created habits and rhythms in his life And that's how he was able to live like that. And so I think that's something that we need to do too. Like we need to create some habits and some practices and some rhythms in our life that allow us to live countercultural and to allow us to live like Jesus did. And it doesn't come easy, right? We sometimes have to make sacrifices. We have to put in the effort to live like that. So I want to talk about 3 different things on how we can slow our roll a little bit. And the first one is to get away. I know this is not rocket science. You guys have probably heard this, but really it can revolutionize the way you live your life. And it's just having a consistent time with Jesus, practicing silence and solitude with him. In Luke 5:16, it says, "But Jesus often withdrew to the wilderness to pray." If Jesus did it, then it's probably important that I do it as well. Like it talks about how Jesus was like really busy during the day. In Mark, there's this one day where he's like, everything's like, he was feeding the 5,000 and there were so many things going on. And then he went away at night to spend time with his Father because he knew that was essential for him to be able to do what he was called to do. In those times away with his Father is where he got his identity and where had his focus and he got his purpose is in those times away. And Henry Nouwen, who's a professor and author, he said, "Without solitude, it is virtually impossible to live a spiritual life. We do not take the spiritual life seriously if we do not set aside time to be with God and listen to him." That's pretty convicting. Like, we're not taking our spiritual life seriously if we're not, like, it's great to come to church, like, and it's great to be in community, but there is something about just getting away with Jesus. And there's, like I said, there's many ways to be studying the Bible. Like, there's a lot, but there's just being with him. In Psalm 46:10, it says, "Be still and know that I am God." And in the chapter, in the beginning of the chapter, it talks about how like the nations are in chaos and their kingdoms are crumbling. But in the midst of that, it sounds like our culture a little bit, right? But in the midst of that, we can be still and know that he is God. And the Hebrew phrase for be still is more than just to trust or not to panic. It's truly like to surrender and to allow him to be in control and not us trying to be in control. And so, like I've had a quiet time throughout my life, and I've done Bible reading plans, and like all that's great, and I still do. But I've added on this aspect in the last couple months of just truly taking time alone and silencing my heart and being with Jesus. So I get up in the mornings and I have my coffee because right, Jesus people, coffee's part of having your time with you, at least for me, maybe not for you. But I set aside distractions. I sit outside if I can, if the weather's okay, and I can just sit and allow a moment. And I've started doing this app. It's called Lectio 365, and it's like it's kind of a Bible reading prayer guided app, and it starts with this phrase. So every day it's the same. Every day I start with the same phrase. As I enter prayer now, I pause to be still, to breathe slowly and to recenter my scattered senses upon the presence of God. And just taking that moment first thing and being like, okay, take a deep breath and be still and let God just speak. And it's really allowed some things where God was just able to speak into my life of just like who he is. He's in control. I'm not in control. I'm not the one that control other people. And it allows space just for him to speak to me in that silence. So like if I'm sitting there, I can hear, we have a bunch of trees in our backyard, and you can hear like the leaves rustling, and you can hear the birds chirping when I'm sitting there. So when it's silent, I can hear. So I was outside yesterday morning, and it's about 6:30, and our neighbor's mowing the yard, which that's fine because it's like 105, so I get getting up that early. But with that noise, it was a lot harder for me to hear the leaves and the birds because the mower was going, right? And that's sometimes how our life is. Like we have so much going on that it's hard to take a moment. It's hard to hear God speak to us. So just having that moment of like, okay, God, take a moment and speak to me. And really, he's really like spoken to those things, those identity things of like, I'm enough. Like I don't have to do. And just reading in scripture, like what he's spoken over my life and just holding on to that. And then even just starting my day and taking a moment and thinking through, okay, so like, what's my day look like? And how can I invite God into my day? Whether it's in the meetings or whatever I'm doing is allowing taking time and thinking through and allowing God to be a part of every aspect of my day, not just like the 10 minutes, half an hour, whatever in the morning, but truly resting and bringing in him in and allowing joy and peace and love to be a part of the day for me. And so it just allows me to start my day at rest. And so that's something, just that getting away and having a moment. It doesn't have to be long, but just a moment of silence and solitude. And not every morning is great. You know, like sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm tired. You know, what am I doing? But like, it's that rhythm. You know what? I'm showing up again the next morning. And you know what? I'm showing up again the next morning. And you know what? I'm showing up again the next morning. Because these are rhythms that I'm wanting to create in my life that allow space and allow God to show up. And so the second thing that I'm not real good at is rest. And so, and it's just taking a Sabbath, like taking a day to stop. And Sabbath just means to stop, rest, and to cease doing. And just taking a day and being like, okay, there's not all these things that I have to do. And again, this is hard. This is hard to do, right? At least it's hard to do in my life, of really carving out time to rest and doing things that you enjoy doing. And I grew up in Germany, and so in Germany, stores close. I mean, it's a little bit different right now, but when I was growing up, stores closed at noon on Saturday, and they opened at 8 on Sunday morning. I remember the first time I came to the States, I'm like, Walmart's open 24 hours? Like, what do you people do? Like, this is crazy. Who goes to Walmart at 3 a.m.? Like, why do we have everything open? I don't want to know what people do at Walmart at 3 a.m. But I'm just saying, like, it actually forced you a little bit. Like, growing up in that culture, it forced us to take a day off. Like, you couldn't, nothing was open. You couldn't do a whole lot. Gas stations were open, so that's about it. But it's just, and then, so it's creating that time in our life of just like, okay, let me just take a minute and allow myself to breathe a day, and creating that into our schedule and fill our souls with things that just bring us delight and that bring us joy. And then the last thing is to pace and just to slow down. And sometimes it means simplifying things in our life. Jesus didn't say yes to everything. Like, he had a lot coming at him, and he said no to a lot of things. Now, I'm not saying just say no and sit around. Like, that's not, like, hear my heart here. Like, we're not supposed to do anything. But just recognizing is like, what am I supposed to be saying yes to? And then counting the cost. Like, what is that going to look like? One thing we did that we did not count the cost. So my daughter played volleyball for the first time in 7th grade for school. And she's like, oh, this is fun. Like, I want to play club ball. And so I'm like, okay, I didn't grow up in the States. Like, I don't know nothing about club ball. So I texted a friend. I'm like, your daughter plays. She's like, oh yeah, there's one club that still has tryouts in the fall. The other ones had done them already. So I'm like, okay. And that was like in a week. So I'm like, okay, sign her up for a club. And so she tried out, made the team. And they're like, okay, you want to be on the team? I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, it's like, my son was playing AAU basketball. I'm like, it's like AAU, like 2 games on the weekend here in town. And then, maybe we go to Hermiston once. No. Club volleyball is way more involved than that. They were like weekend trips and tournaments in Seattle and in Spokane. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I'm not saying we wouldn't have done it. We probably would have still played, but we had no idea. Like, we just jumped in, had no idea what it was going to cost, had no idea what the time commitment was going to be and how it was going to affect our family. So sometimes I think we do things because we're like, yeah, that sounds fun and that sounds good. Or yeah, we're going to buy this and that sounds great. Like, let's buy a camper. But what does that actually mean? Like, how is that going to affect our life? And so I think we need to just take a moment and make sure that we're counting the cost when we say yes to something. And then I've just also tried to intentionally slow my days down, like intentionally be, okay, breathe. Like, we go on a walk. I can walk again. We have this loop. It's about a 1-mile loop. And we take our dog on a walk in the evenings. And she's about a 7-pound Yorkie, and she's not trained very well. So she likes to stop and sniff, like every little bit. She's like, she doesn't sniff the flowers. She sniffs, the pee. So we stop and we sniff. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this mile walk should not take 25 minutes. This is ridiculous. But you know what? I'm on a walk with my husband. Like, what's my hurry? Like, I don't need to get to anything that evening. Like, we're here, we're out enjoying each other. Like, we can stop, we can sniff, it's, it's okay. It's okay. But just my mindset is like, oh my gosh, we got to keep moving. Like we got stuff to do, but really, like take a breath and stop. And I've really tried to be a bit more intentional even with my kids. Like I'll come home, I'll leave my phone downstairs and I'll go lay on my daughter's bed. She doesn't always love it when I come in, but just be like, how was your day? Like just take some time and ask questions and engage and be present with my family. Again, it's not her favorite thing, but she'll appreciate it someday. Or just turning off notifications. I've turned off notifications on some of my apps on my phone. I'm like, I don't like that little, red one. So I always have to click on it and be like, okay, I need to make that one go away, right? And so I just turned it off. Deleted apps, like just slowing my day. Last week, I left my phone at home intentionally, and we were going to Dairy Queen as a family. We brought our third child, our dog, along. And so I was in the car. It was like super hot. So I was like, okay, you guys go in. I'll sit in the car with the air conditioning, with the car running. And I had no phone. Have you sat in the car with no phone by yourself lately? It's weird. So I'm sitting there. I'm like, what do I do? I'm like watching people. And you know what? I had a friend going through a hard time. And I was able just to stop and pray for her. Instead of scrolling through my phone, I was able to be a little bit more productive with my time. And again, it's not every time, and like different people are in different seasons and different things, but those are just some things that I've tried to do in my life to slow down and to be present with God and with people. So I just want to take a moment as we're closing here. Let's just close our eyes, and I just want you to think about your life. Are you on a hamster roll of things, of life, of culture, and distractions, and all the things that you have going on? And sometimes, like, different people have a different why. Like, for me, like I shared a little bit, it was about missing out or just feeling like I had to do to be valued. But for other people, it could just be, maybe you're running away from something and you just don't want to deal. Or maybe you're just bored, and so you keep yourself busy with all the things. Or maybe you're running to something, whether it's a promotion or a purchase, maybe or an experience. But so it's important that we reflect, like, why are we living life the way we are? And maybe it's not something you struggle with, which is great. But I just want to challenge you this week. Like, take a moment to get away and let Jesus speak. Take a moment of silence and solitude, and let him speak identity, hope, and life into you. Take a moment where you just stop and rest. Maybe it's not a day, maybe start with an afternoon. And then maybe look into your life. What are some ways that you could slow your pace down? That you could live with less distractions in your life and more engaged with God and with people? Because you know what, guys? Our world needs us. Like, our families need us to be engaged. They need us to be loving them well. And our world is desperate for hope and for peace and for joy. And that's something that we can bring because of Jesus inside of us. I'm just going to pray. Jesus, I just thank you so much, Lord, for how much you love us. Lord, I just thank you for how much you desire relationship with us. Lord, that you truly want to speak to the innermost parts of our heart, that you want to bring us hope, that you want to bring us peace, that you want to bring us life. And so, Lord, I just pray that you would do that with each one of us this week. Lord, that we would live our lives loving you, and that we would live our lives loving the people around us. Amen.